Joe Pullman here from craftworking.net, and in this video I'm going to talk a little bit about firewalls. When you deploy a data center or a new data center, you're going to want to probably look at something a little bit better than your residential gateway firewall that's in your AT&T modem or Verizon modem or whatever. These are adequate for basic home use. What they do is they will basically do security based on application, and these, so you'll go into your modem and go into the firewall settings and basically permit or deny certain applications, and they're actually quite extensive. But they won't really do a good job at doing anything any more granular than that. So maybe some of them might do denying some hosts or some networks from the outside world that you might be able to do, but it's still very limited. And when you deploy a data center, you're going to want to start getting into building virtual machines that you can get to from the internet, and this is going to require you to get some more better security than what these modems can give you. So you can get pick your poison on which vendor you like best, whether you like Cisco or Juniper or some other specialty firewalls that are out there. But as you get into the specific purpose-built boxes out there for firewalls, so you're going to start getting into some quite a bit of expense. So what I'm using is a Cisco router, and in these Cisco routers they've got a feature called zone-based firewall, and what it is it's basically all of the features of their ASA firewall, which is their purpose-built box to do a firewall. The configuration for doing a firewall on iOS is fairly simple. If you're familiar with MCQ, Modular Quality of Service, then you can configure one of these fairly easily. The ASA versions of the firewall do the PIX kind of configuration, so it's quite a bit different. But they basically, both the iOS zone-based firewall and the ASA firewall, basically very, very similar in features. You're going to have to do your research to see if there's a feature in the ASA version that you can't get in the iOS firewall. The older versions of the Cisco firewall, which is the PIX, you probably would want to stay away from these, even though you can get them for like $5 now. But they don't have the bandwidth. They don't have the power to run fairly high data rate through them. Most of these older PICs are 10 base T, 100 base at the best. So you want to look at getting a firewall that has at least 1 gig ports on it. This is going to get you into the ASA 5520 series and above. These are relatively inexpensive and and will do a very good job for you. But the real purpose of this video is to actually discuss that you now are in a virtualized environment, or will be, that you can now look at deploying a virtualized firewall. And there's a few options out of this. Cisco does have a cloud services router, CSR 1000V, which is a virtualized router, which is based off the ASR platform, ASR 1000. And it will do a zone-based firewall just perfectly. However, you do need to make sure that when you deploy one of these, is that when you license it, you're going to need the security license pack in order for the firewall to actually work. So now we're getting into a little bit more expense, but you do get a full-featured ASR 1000 that will actually be great for doing a zone-based firewall. Cisco also has a virtual ASA appliance that you can get. It's basically the top of the line ASA 5585. you can get it licensed with a full bandwidth up to several gigabytes worth of throughput, and it does have all of the security features that come with a full-fledged ASA firewall. Something to look into. Personally, I'm looking at deploying a CSR 1000 and a zone-based firewall for my purposes. Having some difficulty with that since I'm trying to get it to work with the AT&T service, which is I'll get into later. But as far as going back to the physical, the physical versus the virtualized is that you're now looking at, if you deploy a physical firewall, whether it be an ASA or an iOS-based firewall or something from another vendor, is that you have another box in the house taking up heat, power, and it's something to look into when you deploy one of these. And if it is in your house, you're looking at how much power that your house circuits can supply without blowing the fuse or blowing the breakers or tripping the breakers. And something that do the math on and do the thing. But the good thing about a physical firewall is that its performance is going to be a bit better because your forwarding or your data traffic is going to be all done in hardware, which is going to be switched a bit faster. So you won't have any problems with having a software processor try to process all this data. Since remember, you're going to be running a firewall, so it's going to be doing inspection, it's going to be doing NAT, it's going to be doing port forwarding and everything else that a firewall does. Even if you're so inclined, it will do VPN, and this does take quite a bit of processing power to actually do, since you're going to be running IPsec and you're going to be doing several levels of security. The processing is quite intensive on these, so it may slow it down a little bit. But in a real physical firewall, this isn't a problem because the engines that do the inspection and do the IPsec is all done in software, but the forwarding and the actual moving of packets around is done in hardware. So it offloads some of your load of your workload on your firewall into the physical ASICs on the firewall. Then also on the firewall you can get your choice of ports as well. Even in a physical firewall, you're going to be basically limited to what virtual network cards that you have on your host and your hypervisor. So, but something to think about is to deploy a soft firewall or a virtualized firewall. The other things is if you are running into are going to be running a data center with multiple hosts on it. Now these virtual firewalls support basically clustering, and you can actually run two of them in a failover situation. So that basically if you do deploy a virtual firewall, that if your host disappears or it crashes, that you won't be out of firewall. So another nice thing about the physical is that it is not dependent on your virtualized infrastructure to work. So in a physical, if your network, you're still there, it's still up and running, even though it may be a single point of failure. But if your host fails or your virtualized system fails, there's no way to actually connect to it and do any troubleshooting. But if on a physical, if your host dies, you can connect directly to the firewall and still have access to the internet. But there's pros and cons to each one of these. And then again, in a physical, you're going to not have to do any cabling. You're not going to have to do any, have any power issues or heat issues, and space issues, as in my case. So basically, when you deploy a virtualized environment and start building your data center, do keep in mind that consider the firewalling. to in your virtualized environment, and because it's not easy to do this afterwards. It's better to plan this in before you build your virtualized center than it isn't, because whether you go physical or virtual, you're going to have to consider the networking. And both of these options, physical and virtual firewalls, will do transparent, so the cabling can be quite less, and you don't have to do routing and put in routers to actually get your traffic delivered. So, but that's a few points on the firewall. Again, just consider upgrading your firewall when you do a data center, or even if you don't do a data center. Do look at firewalling a little bit closely, because security is a big concern. There's just so many hackers out there, and bad people out there on the internet trying to get into your system, and it's indiscriminate. They will go after big governments and big corporations, but they may take, like, let's say, a fire hose to it and go after everybody. And if they can get in, great. Then they're going to try to exploit you. And if you don't consider your security requirements carefully, and makes it it's easier for you, or for a hacker, to get into your network because you have a weak security policy. Then they're going to actually exploit you, because they're going to go out and attack your system to get in. And if they can get in, they will get in. And then they're going to go out and explore and find out everything they can about you. And it's much easier to attack you or me, so the small guy, because we don't have a deep security policy as much, than it is a large company or a government organization, where their security is much more robust than the normal consumer. And like I say, the first thing I would do is look at what the better security enhancements you get from a purpose-built firewall, or an iOS firewall, or a Juniper firewall, than it is from your AT&T modem, because your AT&T modem will deny a lot of things, but not everything. So there's definitely ways around getting through one of these modems than it is to do a real purpose-built firewall. So think about it, and look into, go out on the internet and look at how other people, best practices, and how other people are deploying security in general. And there's a lot of documentation out there on best practices on how to harden your system, and how to make it more difficult for an attacker to get into your system. Because you are going to be running a lot of virtual machines and a lot of infrastructure, because you're virtualized and you can do this. Then it's going to be basically open season if someone gets into your system. So do not overlook the firewalling and security policy when you deploy a data center. So that's all the talking points I have for firewalls. So I will see you on the next video.